For more resources, visit rymonline.org.
The Local Youth Worker is a daily podcast that's centered on 5 questions each week. Ranging from the practical to the professional, we're looking for answers to the questions you're asking. Whether you're in full-time, part-time, or even volunteer youth ministry, this podcast is for you.
All right, everybody, welcome back. We are here with Molly Dawkins. Molly, thanks again for just taking out all the time this week to be with us. It's been good getting to catch up with you.
Yeah, take it up with my boss if I've spent too much time on this.
Yeah, and that's Wilson Van Hooser.
Wilson Van Hooser, yes.
Yeah, he'll be on the podcast one of these days too. So something we ask all youth workers is about books, and this really comes from the belief that we need to be lifelong students. We always need to be reading, and obviously in youth culture, there's just something, we're on the front lines really of culture in general. It seems like there's always so many things changing and happening, and so we need to be reading and educating ourselves on new cultural trends. But the question is, what books besides the Bible have been influential to you? These could be older books, these could be newer books, and then maybe some of the books that you're reading currently. What are some of those? So what do you have for us?
Sure. Well, books that I'm reading right now, I have a couple. One of them is Jaquel Crow's book, This Changes Everything. Yeah. I know you've had her on the podcast, and so she's told you all of her secrets. But this is one book that I'm going through with some of our youth girls here, and we just do a chapter each week. But what's so great about this book is obviously she is writing it as a teenager to teenagers. So even the use of the pronouns like we and us that you see throughout the book, I think is so good for our students to see that there is someone that is their own age or close to their age that is talking about these biblical truths and living it out where she is right now. And another good thing about this is that she just does a good job of providing practical applications to youth. There's a chapter on community where she lists different ways that youth can serve the church. There are things like spending time with an elderly member or doing chores for someone for free, where, a lot of times people will babysit and get money, but it's like doing that as a service and not getting payment, being a greeter, and just those different kind of things. And she just does a really good job with that.
Yeah, that is an excellent book, and it's something, youth workers need to read with their students. They need to put in their hands of their students. That is a very good book.
The next one is called FaceTime by Kristen Hatton. Have y'all talked about this one before?
No, we haven't, but that is a great book from what I've heard.
Yeah, it's really good. I just finished it, actually. But the first half of the book, she goes through creation, fall, redemption, all that jazz. But then the second part is really cool because she essentially does these case studies of teenage girls that, one story could be about a girl struggling with comparison, or the next one could be someone studying or struggling with body image or peer pressure. And so she gives a story which really, I think, helps grab your attention, and then some questions of, what are the lies that this girl is believing, and where's the truth of the gospel? How can that be applied to her life? And then she walks through that as well. So I think that's a really good resource for girls.
And that's through New Growth Press, isn't that right?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Yeah.
The next one is a book called American Girls. It's by Nancy Jo Sales. It's not necessarily a Christian book. Well, it's definitely not a Christian book, but it's very helpful in understanding youth culture. It goes through, this lady has interviewed 200 or so girls across the country, ranging in age from 13 to 19. And each chapter, the first chapter is about 13-year-olds, and the next is 14-year-olds, and so forth. But it goes through and just talks about the effects of social media and sexualization of these girls. You know, the first two words of the first chapter are "send nudes," and just how that's affecting this generation. I actually started reading this a really long time ago, got about halfway through, and I had to put it down because I just got sad reading it and thinking about how all of this really does affect these teenagers and all the pressures that they have.
Yeah, and I remember when you were reading that, and I remember it was just tough material to work through. And so I know this isn't just like a, I guess kind of putting you on the spot a little bit. Would you recommend that to youth workers with the caveat, okay, it's very tough content to read through? Do you think it's worth youth workers reading through?
I definitely think it's worth reading. Maybe read it in small doses so you don't get sad like me. But yeah, it's eye-opening, and I tend to be naive about this kind of stuff, and so it was very good for me just to see the stories that she shares in here about these things that guys are asking girls to do, or things that these girls are doing. And from then I've had conversations with students about it, asking them like, hey, I was reading this book. Is this something that you see at your school? And that just opens conversations.
Wow. Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, you mentioned Jaquel Crowe. I think Jaquel Crowe wrote a review of that book on the Gospel Coalition. I don't know if that's correct or not, but she might have done that. So that could be helpful just for youth workers to go out and at least read the review and some of the highlights from the book. So I know those are three that you've been reading somewhat recently. What about some of the books that have been more life-shaping for you?
Yeah, I think I was having to think about that one a lot. And I think the one for me would probably be The Reason for God by Tim Keller. I know that y'all have talked about this on the podcast with different people.
There's a reason why people bring it up. I mean, it's an excellent book that's been fairly, life-shaping for many people. So go for it.
Yeah, I read it in college, and I was just at a point in my life where I was just struggling with just different, I guess, just the brokenness of the world and how I fit into it. And that book just does a great job of answering questions like, why does God allow suffering? And being able to defend those things scripturally was so just cool for me to see. Obviously, Tim Keller is a very intelligent man, and the way he writes, it is so logical and it just makes sense. And so, yeah, that one was just really good for me. And one that I'm reading right now is Resilient Ministry by Bob Burns, Tasha Chapman, and Donald Guthrie. I think this one has the potential to be life-shaping, especially in ministry, at least. It's so good. And I know it's written kind of towards pastors, and that's not necessarily what I am, but it's so nice to read through this, and because they interviewed all of these pastors about things like self-care and just anything like to their weekly schedules and things that they struggle with. And it's just so comforting to read through that and say, oh, like, me too.
Yeah, that's something. I mean, as you're saying it, it's been a book somebody recommended to me, or at least a few people have recommended it, and I still haven't read it. It's on my to-read list. But even you talking about it, describing it in that way, makes me want to pick it up, because I didn't realize the exact format of that book. I thought they had interviewed several pastors. But like you said, I mean, even though you're not a quote unquote ordained minister, that there's a lot that you can apply from that, that you can glean from that, that's helpful.
Right. Like there's a chapter, I think it's talking about self-care and just preventing burnout, and even going through and kind of just labeling, like these are ways that you can kind of protect yourself from burnout, making sure you have enough sleep, making sure you exercise and eating well. And just kind of putting a label on that has been really good for me. Because in youth ministry, we do kind of have, and ministry in general, you might have just really weird schedules where you're up late on a Wednesday night, and then you have to wake up early the next morning for a prayer breakfast. And so really just kind of taking care of your body, mind, and soul is so important.
Yeah, that's good. It's a reason for God, resilient ministry. Do you have any others?
I think that's it.
All right. Yeah, those are two good ones, for sure. And like I said, I've heard so many talk about resilient ministry. And as you were talking about that, and I said, you're not an ordained minister. I'm not either. And so there would be some stuff that, might not apply. I'm also thinking of Jason Halopoulos's book. I think it's The New Pastor's Handbook.
Oh, yeah.
And it might have, off the top of my head, 40 to 50 chapters in it. And so each chapter is, 2 to 3 pages. Some are a little bit longer. But even as I go through that, and I'll see a few chapters where I think, this has nothing to do with me. This would be more ordained ministers. But there is a lot of good practical content in there. So that one might be something kind of similar that would be beneficial to others to pick up. Well, Molly, thanks again for taking the time out this week to discuss just a lot of things about youth ministry. It's been fun getting to catch up with you.
Oh, yeah. It's been great fun. Thanks, John.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks so much for tuning in this week to the local youth worker. As always, we hope you've been encouraged and equipped in your call as youth workers. If you take time to rate this podcast on iTunes, it would greatly help us. As always, we want to thank Joe Deegan for providing the music and encourage you to go out and purchase his newest CD, Cover and Title Page, which you can find at iTunes. See you guys next week. Have a great weekend.
Oh, come and buy without money. Oh, come and feast without